Estrella Santos Zacaria is a transgender woman who fled violence and persecution in Guatemala due to her gender identity and expression. She was born in a small town where she faced discrimination and abuse from a young age. She was raped by a neighbor when she was only 13 years old and received death threats from the townspeople who hated her for being different. She decided to escape her nightmare and seek asylum in the United States, hoping to find safety and acceptance. However, her journey was not easy. She was deported back to Guatemala in 2008, after a brief stay in the US. She then spent most of the next decade in Mexico, where she also faced violence and harassment from gangs who targeted her for being transgender. She was raped and assaulted again by a Mexican gang in 2018, which prompted her to try to return to the US once more. She was detained by immigration authorities at the border and placed in removal proceedings. She testified about her past experiences of persecution and her fear of returning to Guatemala, where LGBTQ+ people are frequently subjected to threats and attacks. According to the U.S. State Department, Guatemala has done little to protect LGBTQ+ people, and transgender women are especially vulnerable. However, an immigration judge denied her asylum claim, finding that she did not suffer past persecution or prove that she would face future persecution if deported. The judge also found that she could relocate to another part of Guatemala where she would be safer. Estrella appealed this decision to the Board of Immigration Appeals, BI, which affirmed the judge's ruling. She then appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which also ruled against her. The Fifth Circuit held that she could not challenge the BIA's decision on factual grounds, because federal immigration law only allows judicial review of legal questions. This meant that Estrella could not argue that the BIA was wrong about the facts of her case or the credibility of her testimony. Estrella did not give up. She took her case to the Supreme Court, arguing that federal immigration law should be interpreted more broadly to allow judicial review of factual issues as well as legal ones. She claimed that the BIA's decision was based on erroneous findings and that she deserved another chance to prove her eligibility for asylum. The Supreme Court agreed with Estrella. In a unanimous decision written by Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the court ruled that federal immigration law does allow judicial review of factual issues in some circumstances, such as when the BIA adopts or modifies an immigration judge's findings. The court said that Estrella should have been able to challenge the BIA's decision on factual grounds, because the BIA had adopted some of the immigration judge's findings and modified others. The court reversed the Fifth Circuit's judgment and remanded Estrella's case for further proceedings. This means that Estrella will have another opportunity to seek asylum from sexual assault and death threats in Guatemala. She will be able to argue that the BIA was wrong about the facts of her case and that she meets the criteria for asylum. Estrella's case is a landmark victory for transgender rights and asylum seekers. It shows that the Supreme Court recognizes the plight of transgender people who face persecution in their home countries and the need for fair and meaningful judicial review of their claims. It also shows that Estrella is a courageous and resilient woman who fought for her dignity and freedom against all odds. After enduring sexual assault, death threats and harassment in Guatemala due to her gender identity, Estrella Santos Zacaria decided to flee to the United States and seek asylum. She hoped to find safety and acceptance in a country that claims to respect human rights and diversity. However, her journey was not easy. She first crossed the border in 2008, but was quickly deported back to Guatemala. She then spent 10 years in Mexico, where she faced more violence and abuse from a Mexican gang that raped and assaulted her. In 2018, she tried again to enter the US, but was detained by immigration authorities. She told them her story and asked for protection, but they did not believe her. They said she did not have enough evidence to prove that she would be persecuted in Guatemala because of her transgender identity. She appealed her deportation order to an immigration judge and then to the Board of Immigration Appeals, but both denied her claim. They said she did not show that the Guatemalan government was unable or unwilling to protect her from harm, or that she belonged to a particular social group that was targeted for persecution. She did not give up. She took her case to the Federal Court of Appeals, arguing that she had a right to challenge her removal order under the law. She said that the immigration authorities had violated her due process rights by denying her a fair hearing and ignoring the evidence of her suffering. But the Federal Court of Appeals also rejected her appeal. They said she had not exhausted all the remedies available to her in the immigration proceedings, and that she had waived some of her arguments by not raising them earlier. She was running out of options. She faced being deported again to Guatemala, where she feared for her life. She knew that Guatemala was one of the most dangerous countries in the world for transgender people, and that the government had done little to protect them from violence and discrimination. She decided to make one last attempt. She asked the Supreme Court of the United States to hear her case and review the decision of the lower court. She said that she deserved a chance to present her case before an impartial judge who would respect her dignity and human rights. She was not alone. She had the support of many organizations and individuals who filed briefs on her behalf, urging the Supreme Court to grant her petition. They said that her case raised important questions about the scope of judicial review for immigrants facing deportation, and about the recognition of transgender people as a persecuted group under asylum law. She also had the support of many people who shared her story on social media and raised awareness about the plight of transgender asylum seekers. They said that she was a brave woman who had overcome many obstacles and deserved compassion and justice. She waited anxiously for months for the Supreme Court's response. Finally, on May 11, 2023, she received some good news. The Supreme Court agreed to hear her case and reverse the decision of the lower court. They said that she had a right to appeal her deportation order in federal court, even if she had not fully challenged it before immigration authorities. They said that federal immigration law was flexible enough to allow non-citizens like her another day in court, especially when their lives were at stake. They said that this was consistent with the principles of due process and fairness that underlie the American legal system. They also said that they were not ruling on the merits of her asylum claim, but only on whether she could pursue it further in federal court. They remanded her case back to the lower court for further proceedings. This meant that she still had a long way to go before she could secure asylum in the U.S. She still had to prove that she met all the requirements for asylum under the law, and that she faced a well-founded fear of persecution in Guatemala because of her transgender identity. But it also meant that she had a new opportunity to present her case and make her voice heard. It meant that she had a chance to fight for her rights and dignity as a human being. It meant that she had hope. In this section, we will explore how Estrella Santos Zakaria appealed her case to the Supreme Court and won a landmark ruling that recognized gender identity as a basis for asylum claims. Santos Zakaria is a transgender woman from Guatemala who fled to the United States after facing sexual assault, death threats, and harassment in her home country due to her sexual orientation. She first arrived in the U.S. as a teenager, but was deported in 2008. She returned in 2018, but was again ordered to be removed by an immigration judge who found that she did not prove that she would face persecution if sent back to Guatemala. Santos Zakaria challenged her deportation order in federal court, arguing that she had a credible fear of harm based on her gender identity, and that the immigration judge had applied the wrong legal standard. However, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals denied her appeal, ruling that she had not exhausted all the remedies available to her in the immigration proceedings. Santos Zakaria then appealed to the Supreme Court, which agreed to hear her case. The Supreme Court unanimously ruled in her favor, holding that federal immigration law allows non-citizens to challenge their removal orders in federal court even if they did not fully raise their arguments before immigration authorities. The court also noted that other appellate courts had reached the same conclusion. The Supreme Court's decision means that Santos Zakaria will have another chance to present her asylum claim before a federal judge who will review her case de novo, or from scratch. The decision also has implications for other asylum seekers who may face similar barriers to accessing federal courts. Santos Zacharia's case is a milestone for transgender rights and asylum law, as it recognizes that gender identity is a valid ground for seeking protection from persecution. It also shows that the Supreme Court is willing to uphold the rights of non-citizens to challenge their removal orders in federal court, despite the government's arguments that doing so would undermine the efficiency and finality of immigration proceedings. The victory of Leon Santos Zacharias at the Supreme Court is not only a personal triumph, but also a source of hope and inspiration for other trans asylum seekers and advocates who are fighting for their rights and dignity in the U.S. Santos Zacharias' case shows that the U.S. justice system can recognize and protect the lives of trans people who face persecution and violence in their home countries because of their gender identity. Santos Zacharias is one of many trans women from Guatemala who have fled to the U.S. seeking safety and freedom. Guatemala is a country where trans people are routinely targeted, harassed, assaulted, and killed by gangs, police, and civilians. According to a report by Human Rights Watch, at least 38 trans women were murdered in Guatemala between 2016 and 2020, and many more faced discrimination, extortion, and abuse. The report also found that the Guatemalan government has failed to investigate and prosecute these crimes, and has not provided adequate legal recognition or health care for trans people. Many trans women from Guatemala have sought asylum in the U.S., but they have faced numerous obstacles and challenges in the immigration system. They have often been detained in unsafe and abusive conditions, denied access to legal representation and health care, and subjected to biased and hostile questioning by immigration judges and officers. Some have been deported back to Guatemala, where they faced renewed threats and violence. Santos Zacharias' case is a rare example of a trans woman from Guatemala who was able to appeal her deportation order in federal court, thanks to a unanimous ruling by the Supreme Court that granted her that right. The ruling also benefits other non-citizens who want to challenge their removal orders in federal court, even if they did not fully exhaust their remedies before immigration authorities. This could open the door for more trans asylum seekers to have their cases heard and reviewed by higher courts. Santos Zacharias' case is also a testament to the courage and resilience of trans asylum seekers and advocates who have supported her throughout her journey. Santos Zacharias has endured sexual assault, death threats, and harassment in Guatemala and Mexico, as well as deportation and detention in the U.S. She has never given up on her dream of living a dignified life in the U.S., where she can express her true self without fear. She has also received legal assistance and emotional support from organizations such as Transgender Law Center, Immigration Equality, Lambda Legal, and others who have advocated for her rights and well-being. Santos Zacharias' case is not over yet. She still has to prove that she qualifies for asylum based on her fear of persecution in Guatemala. But she has already made history by winning her case at the Supreme Court, and by raising awareness about the plight of trans asylum seekers in the U.S. Her case has inspired other trans asylum seekers and advocates to fight for their rights and dignity, and to demand that the U.S. government respect and protect them as human beings.